Okay, we're just going to get started so I don't keep you guys here all night. This is the first class of Metasploit Unleashed. Thank you all for coming. There's going to be several more sessions. We meet every week Thursday at 8 and Saturday at 3, so mix and match as you please. If you can't make it one week at the Thursday time, you're welcome to come on Saturday. We do the same thing both weeks, and both meetings each week, so you just need to come once. And we are going to bring in some guest speakers this Saturday. Actually, this was the only time he could do it, so late notice on this one. This Saturday at 4:30, so after the normal class and then a break, Raphael Mudge, who does Armitage, is going to come in and demo for us. If you can come in for the 4:30 slot and see it, it'd be great. It'll also be broadcast and there will be a video, so if you miss it in the future, there'll be more notice about when people are coming in. Rob Fuller has also agreed to come in. And those are all the people I have confirmed so far, but on top of learning the class, I want you guys to see some interesting things like Armitage and other things people are doing with Metasploit that are really cool. I'm Georgia. I'm the director of Cyber Warface here at Reverse Space. That's kind of cyber warfare, but I did an interview with Hack5, and that's what they credited me as director of Cyber Warface, and I kind of liked it, so that's what my title is now. So some acknowledgments. Oh, does anybody here, and if you're in the chat, just chat it. Does anybody not have the syllabus? You don't have the syllabus. It's the one I made up. Let me add you to the email list. So I guess theoretically, if you're in the chat, you have to have gotten something, but you may not have this. No, I sent you all the syllabus, but like I said, if you don't have it, let me know and I'll get it to you, and then you'll get future announcements. So some acknowledgments about this. The Metasploit team, of course, they made an awesome product. Obviously, we wouldn't be having a class on it if it didn't exist. And then offensive security. If you follow me on Twitter, you see me talking about the OSCP. Well, I finally got it. They're the ones who make that. If you're interested in doing pen testing training, that's a pretty good one. They made Metasploit Unleashed. They did this coursework, and they also had guest people come in and write for them. So the entire Metasploit Unleashed team is included in there. They did a lot of the groundwork for me. Also, to be added in there is Iron Geek & Co., they did a class on this before in the Midwest, and I watched their videos, and that helped me make my talks as well, so thank you to them. Also, thank you to Hackers for Charity for being awesome and feeding children in Uganda. And if you enjoy the class, we don't want any money for us, but we do ask that if you really enjoy it, you do what you can to contribute to Hackers for Charity. That's what the people who wrote Metasploit Unleashed asked for as well. I regularly give them some donations and help out with them. If you're interested, let me know. And also thank you to Reverse Space. Thank you, Carl, for letting me have this class here. Great space to meet in. So. There was a Reverse Space logo on my slides, but it disappeared somewhere between my work computer and my home computer through my email. But it does have a Germ logo down there. So I have a website called Germ. So, fundamentals. What is Metasploit? How many of you have used Metasploit before here in our audience? You have? Great. The rest of you? Well, you don't really know what it is yet. Well, Metasploit is an exploitation framework. You use it on a pen test lot. If you're doing exploit development, it's also useful. And it's Ruby-based. Anybody have experience developing in Ruby? No. Really, if you don't work on Metasploit, you probably don't, as far as I can tell. Though I saw something that said that Metasploit was the biggest project in Ruby. I don't actually, I think, what's it called? Rosetta Stone would probably give it a run for the money, because I know that's done in Ruby as well. It's Ruby on Rails, which I guess is still considered Ruby. But it's definitely a very big community effort. And it's modular, so if you're doing your exploit development and you're working on a module, you can just add it in. regular updates. And really what it is it's a bunch of modules. Like I said, it's got exploits, it's got payloads, it's got auxiliaries, and lots of other things. And you can use this in a variety of ways. We're going to talk about a few of them tonight. But it's a way to make your exploit development streamlined and a way to make your pen test streamlined as well. Installing metasploit. Does everybody here have metasploit on Backtrack or something else? Yes. What about you guys in the chat? Grex, did you work out everything? Chat? Okay. Right. Alright, well, we'll deal with the Armitage situation. But as long as everybody has metasploit running, then we'll be good for tonight. So, I'll really just put these links in here if you need more help or want to install it on a particular platform. I say use Backtrack. That's what I use. That's what I've given you. That has everything, not just metasploit, but lots of other things. Everything we're going to use, like in next class, we'll be doing vulnerability scanning and information gathering, and we're going to show Dratus. It's a place to keep your work. That's already set up on Backtrack, whereas it can be kind of a pain to set up in Linux. You have to install a bunch of dependencies, as you do with these things. So I prefer Backtrack as my penetration testing place of choice. So that's what I say. But I have Windows, Linux, and Mac instructions here. Metasploit will run on all of those. So if you prefer not to use Backtrack, here are the links you need. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, apparently I'm not actually... Whoa, what just happened? Okay, some terminology. Any of you pen testers or have some pen testing experience? No. Okay, so some basic terminology about pen testing. An exploit, that's your vector, you penetrate the system. There's a vulnerability, you write an exploit, it will take advantage of it and get you in the system to do bad things. Your payload is your shell code, what you want the exploit to do. So you've exploited the system, you want a shell or to change the wallpaper or whatever you want to do, shut down the firewall, that's your payload. And encoders, they encode and mangle the payload. If you want to avoid antivirus, then you would use an encoder. Metasploit does all of that as well. Metasploit, on top of being able to do just the exploits inside of the framework, if you're doing exploit development, a lot of what I use it for is when I'm doing exploit development, to make my payload, I can just make it inside of Metasploit if I want a reverse shell, and then I put it inside of my exploit. I'm not using Metasploit to do the exploitation, but it can make the shell code for me so I can do my payload, and I use an encoder to do that. It also has auxiliary modules. It does all your vulnerability scanning and checks. It has a lot of checks for like MySQL and things like to log in, like password list work. There's all sorts of things. A good way to get started in working with developing for Metasploit is what does Metasploit not do as an auxiliary yet, and then write it. It's something you want to see. So there's a wide variety of auxiliaries. We will, throughout the course, look at a lot of those and how they can help you on a pen test. And a session in Metasploit is a connection from a successful exploit. You do an exploit against a vulnerable box, it gives you a session. What we're going to show is a reverse interpreter shell today. That'll be a session that it's you communicating from your box with the vulnerable box and giving it commands. That makes sense to everybody? Okay, great. So an example of why you'd want to use Metasploit. So on a traditional pen test, what I would do is I'd find a vulnerability, I would run Nessus or just see an open port if it's like the OSCP and you can't even run vulnerability scans. But I would see a possible vulnerability and I would start doing research on it. And then I would find a public exploit for that if it's available. And then from the exploit, I would need to make sure it works on my specific target. What we're working on today, our vulnerable system, is Windows XP Service Pack 2. So I would need an exploit that would work for that. Anybody familiar with buffer overflows? A little bit. Okay. Well, just as an example, because that's what the exploit we're going to look at is. You don't really need to know that. A lot of what's helpful about metasploit is you don't really need to know a lot of that nitty-gritty to get started. I mean, that's definitely something you want to move into. It's a lot of fun. If you find this fun, we'll do another class on buffer overflows and exploitation. But metasploit will kind of give you a leg up where you can start working in this and get your shells and have fun and start learning to pen test without having to immediately dive into writing your own exploits and the nitty-gritty of it. So that's why we're starting with this. But if you find a public exploit, it might not necessarily be for your specific system. Your system is vulnerable, but you know, if Windows is vulnerable, chances are everything from that year is vulnerable. So if it's XP, that probably means any XP before SP2 is also vulnerable. Windows 2003 was around the same time. That's probably vulnerable as well. But it's not implemented quite the same way. Your offsets are going to be different. Your return address, what happens with a straight-up stack overflow for buffer overflow is you basically have a buffer allocated and you run out of that, and what you want to do is overwrite the return address, which tells the CPU what instruction to execute next. And you take control of that and then tell it what to execute your stuff instead of the program stuff. So the return address is going to be different for every system. So because I have a public exploit, I might not be able to just run it out of the box and have it work because it's not built for Windows XP Service Pack 2. If it's written for something else, it wouldn't necessarily work right away. So I would need to change that. I would need to find the correct offsets either from another exploit or by fuzzing it in a debugger. Like if I had a VM of Windows SP2 XP Service Pack 2, then I could find the return address. But that's extra work for me that I'm trying to avoid by using metasploit. And also I'd need to replace the shellcode. Again, the shellcode is your payload. That's in the public exploit. It might have a reverse shell going to not my IP address, basically. Or it might have it doing something else entirely. If I want a specific payload, I would need to change that. And so these are all the changes I would need to take. I'm actually going to run you guys through that process. So say I'm using SP2 of Windows XP. So what I would do is I would research around for some public exploits because I see port 445 TCP open. So I'd look up some exploits that might work for that. I find this vulnerability, which is a remote code execution vulnerability from Windows. I think it hit everything, XP 2003, everything that was out at the time. This is from 2008. And I find this on Security Focus. I just do some Googling around things like exploit database or Security Focus, and I find this and I want to use it. So over here they have an exploit section which will show me some public exploits. There's a few for here, a lot of discussion about it. Well, I like Python. Anybody here like Python? What programming languages do you guys like? Perl? Okay. You also see some exploits in Perl often. Well, these are, we have a C and a Python. The C I would have to compile. I'd rather use the Python because I know Python better. So I would click on the Python and have a look at it. I read Python pretty well for exploits, so this is actually one that's pretty easy to understand, but it has, we're not really going to go into it too much, but it has its shellcode and it does a bind to port 4444, so that actually we could use. Just have it, unless it had a firewall, which SP2 was the first Windows that had the firewall enabled immediately, so doing a bind port where it just have the machine listen on a port that we could then connect back to might not work because the personal firewall on the machine might block it. So we might want to go with a reverse shell, in which case we'd have to get rid of that and add in our own stuff. Additionally, the payloads here are for 2003 and 2000 targets, nothing about XP Service Pack 2. So if I wanted to use this, I would need to replace the target information to work for my SP2. That's all a lot of work for me. Good practice, definitely something you want to learn as you go on if you enjoy this sort of thing. But with metasploit, I can just avoid all of that entirely. Let's see. So with metasploit, all I need to do is load up my metasploit module. If it has a module for that vulnerability, then I can just load that up, select the target OS. If it has my Windows XP Service Pack 2, which chances are if it's vulnerable, then it probably does in its list of targets. A lot of the exploits actually will select the target for you. It'll query. This one that we're going to show actually does, but we'll show how to show targets and select one as well for those that don't. And then you set your IP addresses. If I want to do a reverse shell, I tell it my local IP address is this. This is what you want to connect back to. The machine I want you to attack is this IP address. And then I select the payload, what I want it to do. In that case, a reverse shell, I would tell it that. And then I just exploit it. And I didn't have to find any return addresses. I didn't have to write any shell code. It just did it all for me. So it's a good way to streamline your pen test. Let's look at how we do that actually. So this is Backtrack. If you're not familiar with Backtrack, when you start it up, your passwords, it's going to be root tour, so root and then root backwards for your login. That's default on Backtrack. And when you log in, it doesn't set up your networking by default. I imagine that's because you don't, in a pen test, you might not immediately want to alert the network out there that you've gotten onto the network. So you, with Linux, you would do, let's not be on the other side of my microphone. You would do etc init.d networking start. I already have mine up, and that will put up your network interfaces and do a DH client, which will get you an IP address if you're using DHCP, which here we are. So if you're having any problem with networking, that's probably why you do have to start it yourself. You can set it to automatically start. I mean, this is just really Ubuntu, so it works all the same way. It just has pen testing tools built into it. So we want to use metasploit. So I will go into all these commands later. I just want to show you how nicely this works. So since this is Backtrack, it has a directory called pentest, which you wouldn't normally see on Ubuntu, of course. So go to pentest, exploits, and framework 3, which is metasploit framework 3. And we start MSF console. Again, we will talk about MSF console in detail in the slides. And I'll start that up, and it loads all our modules, so it does take a moment. There we go. And so I want to attack, I want to use this exploit here, or this vulnerability, and I want to get a shell. So I would, it actually says, if you read that security focus thing, it says there's a metasploit module and it has the name on it, so I would get it from there. VMware. So I would just use that module. Windows SMB, and it's named after the Microsoft Advisory. So I would use that module, and then I would set my payload to one that I want. Again, we'll talk about this. Interpreter. So I've set what exploit I want to use and what payload I want to use, so what it does after it exploits. I need to set my IP addresses, which I have written down over here. Set my rhost. Again, we're just going through this real fast. We'll look at it in depth. So I set my rhost, which is my remote host. Set my lhost, which is where we want it to connect back to, which is me. And if the demo gods like me, this will work. Funny story, earlier I couldn't get it to work. It was because they weren't on the same network, one of them was on the NAT, and one of them was bridged. And I just got a session, and now I have full control of that machine, and that's all I had to do is type in some stuff. Not bad, huh? Alright, so we'll talk about everything I just did as we go along. But that's an example. That's what you can do with metasploit. Makes it really streamlined. So, in order to use all this, we need ways to interact with it. What I just showed you is MSF console. We're going to look mainly at MSF console. That's what I use. That was when I was talking earlier with a metasploit expert. He said, don't talk about the command line interface. Just talk about MSF console. We are going to talk about MSF CLI or CLI or whatever you're supposed to call it as well, but MSF console is what I'll be using for all the demos. That's where you get the most functionality. That's where it's at. And also MSF web is still around in Framework 2. It was good. It was a nice little interface, particularly for payloads. It was really easy to generate payloads with all nice checkboxes and things, but it's not around anymore. Also, the GUI is not around anymore. Those have both been discontinued. If you're particularly interested in looking at them, we can. We're not going to cover it in the class. And also now, recently, there is Metasploit Pro and Metasploit Express. Since Rapid7 bought Metasploit, it's still free. We can still use regular Metasploit, but Metasploit Pro and Express are tools that do cost money and have more support. But Metasploit, the free version, is still around, and it's still got great community work going on it. So it's probably been the best example I've seen of a security tool getting bought and becoming corporate, but still keeping its roots in the community. So I'm going to see if I can get us a demo of Pro and or Express in one of the classes. It has a nice GUI and has a lot of features. If any of you have ever used Core, it's not the same as Core, but kind of moves in the same direction of further helping you with your pen tests. And also Armitage is a kind of a replacement and then some for the Metasploit GUI. Like I said, Raphael Mudge is going to be in on Saturday to show Armitage, so if you can't make it in for that, be sure and check out the video. He's the one to watch for that. And Armitage is pretty impressive if you haven't seen it. It's very amazing. He's very good. The visuals are just amazing on it. I've never seen better, really. So, using MSF console. Like I said, that's the one we're going to use. Help shows help. So, if you ever need help, just type in help and it will help you. And connect, kind of like Netcat. Also, anything you can do in the regular Linux shell, you can do from inside Metasploit, and the console, like a traditional one that you would see is, oh, I have to set my local host, but I don't know my IP. So if I just type in ifconfig inside of Metasploit, it will still work fine. So you still get your regular shell. It really just adds on things. And then there's loading, unloading, and load path. This is particularly if you're doing development, if you're working on an exploit and want to add it to Metasploit, you can just load it in from anywhere. And then route. Route's a really good one. Think about if you have hit the web server that is available to the outside and you've got a session on it, and then there's all these workstations for all of the employees in the company you're pen testing are in there, but they're not publicly accessible. They don't have ports going to the outside. You can use route, and it'll send all your traffic. It's like a pivot. It'll send, if I say route all of the traffic to that subnet inside through my session, then I can now exploit inside, whereas I wouldn't be able to because it sends the traffic through the box we've exploited, and since that can speak to the boxes inside, then we can see what's behind the corporate firewall, so to speak. So route's a really good one as we go farther in the class. We'll see. IRB drops you into Ruby interpreter. I have never used that, and since you guys don't know Ruby, you'll never use it either at this point. And jobs will show you the running jobs, and you can terminate some of them if you want to. It'll just show everything that's running. The time you would use that is, there's some things like browser autopone where it loads a lot of things at once. You can see everything that's loaded. So there's some automatic features where if you're trying to get someone through their browser, you don't necessarily know what's going to come, so it'll load up all the available exploits and try them, because you don't know what's going to come in. Somebody could come in with Internet Explorer, and then there's a Firefox, so that's an example of where you would use jobs. But the real stuff you want to get into is how do you do exploitation with MSF console. The commands for that, like we saw, is use. I would use a module. That could be an exploit or auxiliary. I say use. I said Windows SMB MS08067 net API, so it uses that exploit. Could use a scanner. I could use a login feature for a database. I just decide what I want to use and say use module name. And then I would need to set my parameters. So I would say set, and then, for example, our host equals whatever the IP is, tells it where to go. These probably are not in the best order because now I want to say show. If I want to see what options I need to set, I say show options, and then it'll show me all the available options, and I say show targets, and it shows me every kind of host I can hit with this exploit. And another thing is set global. If I'm working on a particular host and I want to try a bunch of different exploits, I don't want to have to set our host every time. So I can just say set G for set global, and it'll keep the IP, and I can, if this exploit doesn't work, I can move into another and it'll keep that setting. And then once I've got everything set and ready to go, I just say exploit and it sends it off. And then an example of exploitation, I probably should have waited because this is exactly what I just showed you. So we'll just walk through it. So I want to do the exploit I just showed you. So say I don't know its particular name. I know how metasploit has its modules structured. So I know that I want to do something with Windows, and I know it's SMB. So I would search for Windows SMB. Actually, I didn't show that, so let's do. Oh, I'm in an interpreter session. Okay, so now I'm back in Metasploit, and I just say search. I'm on the wrong side of the mic again. Search for Windows SMB, and it'll search every loaded module for that, and there's quite a few, but then I could find MS08 067 net API here, and then I would know what it was named, and then I could use it, which I already am. So I can look at, if I'm not sure that's the one I want, I can look at info, and it'll show me a description and give me references down at the bottom. It'll show me, that'll pretty much make it clear to me that it lines up with that exploit that I had online from Security Focus. So I know that's the one I want. I set my options like I did. I can show options. Really need to make this thing taller. And here's my options up here. So I have our host, our port. Some of them are set automatically, like since this is going to hit 445, it goes ahead and sends that, because if it goes to a different port, it's not going to work. It needs to go to the one that's listening, and on Windows, the vulnerable service is listening on 445. So that's already set. And then it shows whether the exploits are required or not over here. Some things are optional. Let's see, what else? So I showed you how to set everything before and just an exploit. Again, we'll have a hands-on portion at the end, so this is just the lecture part. So you'll, by the time we're done, you will have done exactly this. So I was told not to teach you MSF CLI, but I'm going to do it anyways. Why you would want to use it is for scripting. It's, if you're writing a script and you want to use Metasploit inside of it, getting inside console, that would be kind of hard. So this just makes it so that you can do everything in one line. But it doesn't have a lot of the features like pivoting and such, so for your pen test, use MSF console. But how you would do it is basically the same way. Instead of setting each option one at a time, just set it all in one line. So I have an example here. It would just say MSF CLI, and then instead of saying use, I would just have the exploit I want to use, and then I set each of my options. And if I ever got stuck, I could just use the O down at the bottom, and it would tell me what else I need. So, and then also you can say the P if you need to know what payload you want to use, and then just say E to exploit. I don't know that we're ever going to use it in the course, but if you want to do scripting with metasploit, this is how you do it, and you can use this as a reference. Payload types. There's a lot of payloads out there in metasploit. Whenever you use a exploit and you say show payloads, there could be a really long list there. What you might see is some payloads might not be included because they're too big, depending on the exploit. You've only got so much room in your buffer to put your shell code, so it's actually interesting. We had to do it in OSCP where it wasn't big enough to do a shell, so you had to do something else, like issuing a command is a good deal shorter than a shell. You can see a shell would take a good deal more room than saying one command. So we're just going to go through the payload types. Inline is just your single payload with a full shell. I put in my shell code, send it over, and it makes my shell, or whatever else. Stage is, yes? It'll leave it open if it tells you to. But just inline really just means that it all goes over at once. So you have to have room for everything you want to do. Because then it first sends over the exploit, it sends all the shell code with it. As opposed to with staged, it sends over stager and then it calls home and grabs the rest. So if you don't have much room, a staged payload might be the way to go because it won't take up as much room to begin with. It can put its the rest of the shell code somewhere else. So stage is just good. And there's meterpreter payloads. These are, you can think of these as a Venn diagram. You have a meterpreter payload that's staged. These aren't mutually exclusive payload types. Meterpreter is basically, I believe it's short for Metasploit interpreter, but it's a shell and then some, basically. For one thing, it's memory contained. It never hits the hard drive, so there's no forensics evidence of this outside of memory. And it's an advanced payload. It does everything the shell can do, and then a lot of other things. We're going to look at Meterpreter, and you're going to work with Meterpreter too. Meterpreter makes a lot of things really easy, so we'll look at that a little bit more. And then there's also PassiveX, which is your ActiveX based and communicates via HTTP. If you've got some really hardcore corporate firewalls that are hitting egress as well as ingress, and you can't even get your reverse shell out, chances are your users in there can surf the internet, so if it goes through HTTP, you might still be able to get out. So if you're having trouble getting back out, that's the way to go. NoNX is designed to circumvent the data execution prevention. Actually, the payload we just used, or the exploit we just, the payload we just used for Windows SP2 for XP, that was actually a NoNX because SP2 actually had DEP. So it will get around data execution prevention if possible, because a lot of your straight up payloads, it basically says that you can't execute on the stack, so you would need something else, and so it's built into Metasploit to try and get around any security measures if possible. And Ordinal, I've never actually used this and didn't know about it until I was writing this class, but it's a staged payload, and it doesn't require the return address. It like works all the way to Windows 98 because it like has the return address built in. We might see it later on in the course, but it is there. There's also IPv6. Anybody know Joe Klein? Yeah, Joe Klein is our resident IPv6 guru, and there are Metasploit modules that work over IPv6, lots of them, and so since IPv6 is here now, and a lot of your firewalls don't actually filter for IPv6, but our hosts use it, so it's another good way to get around is use the IPv6 one, and then your filters for your firewalls are stopping your regular payloads that go over IPv4, but they're not checking for IPv6, so that's another good way to get a shell. And also there's a DLL injection, which is how Meterpreter works. It's it's injected into a memory process, so it never hits the disk. So those are your payload types. Again, just some information, some background. You don't really have to know this. It's not practical knowledge, but it's good knowledge to have. If I want to do this certain thing, I know I need to get around the filtering. I can be like, well, let's check out some IPv6 ones, and I know they're there. So another thing, some more knowledge. If, like I said in the beginning, if you're working on those public exploits, if there isn't a metasploit module for what I need, if you're working on an ODay and you want to do a payload to test it, if I want to reverse shell, you can use metasploit to do that. You can generate the payload from inside metasploit. You tell it what you want to do. Like you give it the same options you would for the exploit, and it'll actually make the shell code for you, and you can move that into your exploit. So that's another good way to use metasploit, just to make the payloads. And that's where the web client was really great, because it had a lot of nice features where you could just type things in. But you do your same thing. You select your payload. So instead of saying use an exploit, just use a payload. So if I wanted to make the payload, I would just say use Windows Meterpreter reverse TCP. And then I would say generate, and there's bad characters. Like if the CPU sees a certain character inside of a exploit, like the null byte is always bad because it tells it to stop, right? You don't want that in the middle of a string of execution. So always the null byte is in there, maybe in there by default, but then there might be other additional characters that won't work. So, I mean, the way to figure that out is really by process of elimination, send it a bunch of nonsense until it freezes up and that character is bad. And then, but usually if you have a public exploit, if they're nice, they'll tell you what's bad so you can do your own payloads. And then you would set your options the same way. If you're doing a reverse shell, you need to tell it where to connect back to and the port. It has a port already in it, but if you wanted to change it. And then your output, I believe you can do, I know you can do Ruby and I think you can do Perl, but for your, if you're writing an exploit, you would just use raw and it would put out the hex bytes, and that would be what you would put in your exploit. So again, later in the course we'll work on developing exploits, and that's where you'll use this. Meterpreter. So all you have to do, like we already have a Meterpreter session. We chose for our payload, we used Windows Meterpreter. Anything that has Meterpreter in the name is Meterpreter, and reverse TCP. So that's going to do a staged Meterpreter session. So now that we have Meterpreter, we can do everything we can do with the shell, but we can do more. And like I said, it's memory based, never hits the disk. So we are going to look at some Meterpreter. Cool Meterpreter commands. There's lots of them. So just hit help. We're going to use Meterpreter in our hands-on portion. So hit help and do as many fun things as you can with it. We'll talk about a couple, and then we'll use our session to look at them. And then background will get you out of the session if you want to do something else. PS will show you all your processes. A good one is migrate. If you exploit something, particularly if it's like a browser exploitation, if the user closes the process you're in, since your entire Metasploit is inside of that process, it dies. So if you're in a browser, chances are it might have even locked up the browser, so you want to get out of that process. That's where you use migrate. You give it a process ID, it can migrate into another process. Injection. It injects into the process. So you would choose something that isn't going to shut down, and then you're more persistent. Get UID will show you the user. Not always will you end up as system. Depends on what you're exploiting. If what you're exploiting, like if you're exploiting the browser, you're going to be the, it depends on the system what it's called, but you're going to be the web user. If you exploit Apache, you're going to be Apache. You might not necessarily get your system privileges. There is something called get system that will try everything it knows for local privilege escalation to try and make you system, but get UID will tell you what you are now. Right now we're system, but that's because we exploited something that ran a system. Another cool thing, of course you can do all this from a shell. You can download and upload things, but it can get rather tricky, you know. So Meterpreter makes it really easy. You just say download and say the file name on the victim, and it'll pull down that file. Anything that you have rights to, like if your system, you have access to everything, but anything that whatever you got from GetUID has access to, you can pull it down just like that. Read it at your own leisure. Same thing with upload. If you want to upload your tools, if I want to upload Netcat or really anything, I was going to say we could upload some password cracking things, but we already have that, as seen in the next line. But I upload, typically what I would do is I upload plink.exe, which is SSH client for Windows, if I get a Windows shell. So I just say upload my file on my attacker, and then where I want to put it on the victim machine, and it just uploads it up on there, just like that. Hash dump, instead of having to hopefully find the password database backed up in recovery and or upload like SAM dump and all the tools I would need, all of that into the system, or pull it down if I can find a recovery. Meterpreter will just do all of that already. So all I have to do is say hash dump, and if I am a high enough user, it will show me all the hashes. It doesn't crack the hashes for me, sadly, but it does give me the hashes that I can put into a hash cracker. If you have LM hash enabled, you can probably get your passwords pretty fast from that. Why would I want that if I'm already in the system? Users reuse passwords. So if I can get their passwords from this one, then I can use it somewhere else without exploitation. I just pull up a remote desktop and put in their password, and I'm in. So, and also, shell just drops you into a shell. So you can just use a normal shell. Let's look a little bit at Meterpreter. So let's go back to our session. So we can just say sessions. And it shows me I only have one session now, that one exploit I did, which is it says I'm running a system on that box that has my name on it. So I want to interact with it. Sessions, -I for interact, and I choose the session ID, which is 1. And now I'm back in Meterpreter. So like I said, say help, even though I don't remember what everything is. So a couple things we see here just at the bottom of this list is get system. Like I said, it will try every exploit it knows. These are good exploits for getting system on Windows. So we're already system right now, aren't we? Get UID. Yep, we are system, so there'd be no reason to get system. But if we weren't system, we could just go ahead and hopefully escalate hash dump. Password on this box is password, so here it dumps our hash. There's our LM hash right here, which is the LM hash for password. So we could put that into an LM hash cracker, and pretty soon it would come up with password. If it was rainbow tables, it would be really fast. But I think most of them check for password pretty quickly, so that would come out. So that would be a way to get additional exploitation, just like that. Time stalk will manipulate when files were accessed. Companies that have really strong security programs might check and see when files were accessed. So if you're accessing some system files, you might want to change your timestamp. It's a bunch of other things, some fun stuff like record audio from the default microphone. You'll all have fun with this later on, but it just has a list of all the things we can do here. And again, you can just drop into a shell and do anything you want with the system. So it's just, number one, it's forensically sound. Don't you think, Richard? It's forensically sound comparatively because it never hits the disk, right? That's good for getting around forensics people, yeah? So that, plus it has, well, yeah. So yeah, it could be found, of course, but it's more stealthy because it never hits the disk, and it has some additional fun stuff that you all are going to play with. Now, let's finish my slides so we can do that. Everybody, they want to start hacking stuff, right? Yeah? Okay. So let's finish up my slides. Oh, we're almost done because there's my one I used as the template. Oh, we're there. Exercises. Okay, what I want you guys to do is load up MSF console on your backtrack boxes and use MS-08-067 net API, which is the one I used, to get a reverse from interpreter shell. Okay. I'll do that. I usually have to be reminded about that. And I want you to get a reverse interpreter shell. You basically do what I did. I'll go back through the slides and show you whatever you want. Come around and help each other. That's also fun. Use and attack your Windows XP machine. You have the same machine I have, so the same thing will work. Okay, I meant to do the same thing with MSF Client because I was told not to teach you that, so you don't have to do that part. And then once you have that, experiment inside of Meterpreter. See what fun stuff you can make it do. And after you're done with that, more fun is experimenting with different payloads. So show payloads and see what else you can do. And yeah, I already said Meterpreter commands. So that's all you're going to have to do today. We're going to do a lot more fun stuff every class. This is just our overview. So this is just getting your feet wet with using metasploit, getting comfortable using MSF console and exploiting a box. Okay, so let me look at questions. Anybody have any questions right now? If it's about how to do this, I'll come around and help and stuff. But does anybody have any questions about the slides or anything? Yes, they will. The slides will. Okay, the question was, will the slides be available online? And the answer is yes. After Saturday, the slides will be available online. Also, a recording of this will be available after Saturday's meeting. Any other questions? All right, let me look on here. Where did it go? Oh, it's been here the whole time. Any way to stop MSF console from paging? You mean like being able to pipe it into less or something? Actually, no, and that's been a requested feature. So at this point, no. But that has been requested, I know. They asked the same question in Iron Geek's class. Are there any more questions up here? Okay, that's from before. So if anybody on the box for those of you who don't have access to your own Windows XP, you can use mine. It's 172.16.0.171. I've specifically chosen a MSO8067 Net API is kind of the demo exploit because it's very robust and you should all be able to hit it. But if you have your own, go ahead and use that. You should be able to get multiple sessions and it works all the time. Okay, the question from Grex is any way to get us the XPVM? Not really. Come to class at some point, I guess. It's big. I couldn't really email it to you or anything.
So I get that IP that you gave out, is that internet routable that we can
Yeah, that's
attack?
just in here inside reverse space. Sorry about that. But if you anything below SP2, so if you can get your hands on an XP, an old version that isn't fully patched, you can use this. And there is, if you go to the Metasploit Unleashed website, which is in the syllabus under required materials, it does point you at it's NIST. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's just a really big. I was gonna use that one originally, but it's for testing purposes. But it's like 50 gigs, so you can download that, and it shows you how to use it. But in that case, you don't have. Further on, we're going to do some website hacking, and I put a website and SQL on this XP VM that I've given out. So you will need that, but it gives you directions on how to set it up yourself. But if you can't come in ever, if you can think of some way for me to get it to you, something that's like 9 gigs, I'm open to doing it, but I just don't want to give it out to the entire world, you know. So
is there a way that like some VPN that we, I don't know, sort of like some of the infrastructure stuff that we were talking about, where we could, VPN into this space, and then you could just have that machine set up, accessible there.
Hey, Richard, did you hear the question? Grex is interested to see if we can set up a VPN where they can VPN into the space, and then they could work on this as well, which I think is a great idea. Is that something we could do? Okay, he's going to coordinate with our head of infrastructure here at Reverse Space, and we will work on getting that done for you. Because that would be great. Then you guys could hit my box and hopefully not my
Well, that's
host.
the thing. Like, I have an XP image that I use, but it's been patched like up to like a few months ago. So.
Right. If you look at it's something. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like something that will unpatch Windows. If like you wouldn't want to do this to your actual system, of course, but for a VM for testing, if you could take a snapshot, you could maybe remove the patches. But we'll work on getting you VPN access because. Okay. But if he could get it from you, he could get it from me too. Grex, just come in. I know you live here. Can you run through the Yeah, we're going to do that next. For those who didn't hear that on the line, we are going to run through slowly how to exploit so you guys can follow along with me on how to do this.
What about, like, I did download the metasploitable.
Well, metasploitable is a Linux box that was made by Metasploit to, I think it was originally made so they could demo Metasploit Express, but that we're not going to use this in this one. This is a Windows exploit, but that one will be used later in the class. So you have that one. You have your backtracks. You just need Windows. We'll get you the Windows somehow, other than VPN. But I'd like for you all to have it so you could practice outside of class as well. Because some of the stuff we're going to do later with like developing your own exploits, you might get addicted to it and want to do it all the time. So I'd like for you to be able to work independently as well.
So now, you said that the NIST site has an XP that, is it patched or?
It is patched, the NIST one, but you can use the Windows unpatcher to do it, but it's like 50 gigs, so that's not one that I can send you. It's like a virtual disk that's humongous. Okay.
Why would it be? It's so weird. Why that would be so huge.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so
what's the unpatched tool? Because I can, like, do you just go into the
I'll just
Windows add remove and
yeah, Windows
uninstall
add
the patch?
remove. Yeah, I think that'll work too. But then there's like a tool. Let this go away again. Unpatcher. Okay, I don't know what it's called, but I will find it out and send it to the list. I don't want to end up on some porn site or something. Because that will happen while I'm like live. You know it will. Okay. Say help. Okay, we're going to look at the exploit again so everybody can follow along with me. But one more thing, Scott, when you said it's much more convenient to have a local VM infrastructure, you're saying it's better to have XP yourself, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's run through this real slow so you guys can work with me. Go away. Alright, so I'm still in Meterpreter, so let me just exit out of that. Okay, so let's exit. No, let's go back. Okay, so I've just opened MSF console. How do you open MSF console? Okay, let's even go farther back. Okay, so if you're using backtrack, cd to pin test, exploits, framework 3, right here. Everybody good on that? Okay. Then / to tell it current directory, MSF console. That's metasploit framework, so MSF and then the console. And then hit our enter and it'll load up all your modules, so it'll take a second. And then you get the pretty picture. Tells you how many exploits there are. What? Yeah, the ASCII art is like the last time it had a cow saying something. It loads it dynamically each time, so if you load it up a bunch of different times, you'll get different things. It's another way if you're into ASCII art, and maybe that's some way you could get involved. You could send them some more ASCII art. Alright, so we'll make you an exploit developer instead. You will write exploits for Metasploit by the time we are done. Alright, so now we know the name of the exploit we want to use. So first we get inside our VM and we say use. Okay, first, let's say the word help. Whoa, that tells me a lot of things, but if you get lost, help is good. So I would say use. And then we know it's Windows, SMB, MS08. You'll remember this. If you stay with Metasploit for a while and start training, it's like, I have a cat named MS08 067 net API, for instance. If you wanted to write one exploit ever, this would be the one. H.T. Moore wrote it, I believe. So I would say use which exploit I want. Again, I can use search if I'm not sure. If I know part of the path, if I've forgotten MS08 067 net API, or if I've forgotten the net API part, I can just search for part of the string. So I say use, and then I'll see that my MSF looks different. It says exploit and has what exploit I want to use. If you type it wrong, it'll say load failed. I'll have to continue. And now that I'm in there, let's look at info about it. If you know which one you want to use, you don't necessarily have to look at this, but this will show you more info. And it also shows you your targets. See how many targets they have return addresses for here? All sorts of language packs and XP and 2003 and 2000's up here. It's universal. Yeah, 2000 was fun because, yeah, it always seemed to work the same exploits. So, again, if I just want to see the targets, make sure my target is in there. Just say show targets. And target 0 is automatic targeting. In this case, this isn't true on all the exploits, but on this one, it'll query and try and figure out what's on the other side. If you don't know exactly a good way to tell a lot of times with Windows boxes what's on the other side, if it has remote desktop open, you don't know a login, but if you remote desktop to the machine, the login screen says, it doesn't say the service pack, but it'll give you a hint. So if your vulnerability scanners or Nmap or something aren't telling you, you can usually get a pretty good idea from that. That's just a little tidbit from me. But, okay, so we've shown targets. And let's look at the payloads. Show payloads. Be a lot of them. You play around with these once we get through with it, see which ones are fun. There's a lot of, like Windows message box. That'll just show a message box. It's not very useful, but it's fun. So we see all of our possible payloads, the one we want to use. But again, when we're done with this, let's try some other ones. So I would say set, because that'll set my option, and then my option, let's show options first, so we know what we need to set. So we said show options, and that shows us all of the options. After we set the payload, that'll have additional options, so we'll want to say show options again. For instance, if we're using a reverse payload that sends back a reverse shell, we need to tell it our local IP address. So but that won't be the case otherwise. If it's like a bind shell, it doesn't need to know. It just, in that case, would listen on the port on the exploited system, and it doesn't need to know our IP for that. So it will only add in the options it needs in order for the payload to run. So we see that the exploit target is currently set to automatic targeting. If we wanted to change that, we would just say set target, and then the number from, I believe we can still scroll up and see it, like it has the number over here, what we want, but in this case automatic targeting will work, so we can just leave it as automatic. And we also see that there's our host up at the top here, and it doesn't have a setting, so it doesn't know yet what it wants, and it is required. We have to tell it where to attack. That's obviously a requirement. Let me find my IPs again. So I would set our host to 172.16.0.171. And then I want to select a payload. So again, what did we say? No, nobody knows. What do we say first? Set. Yep. Set payload is exactly right. And then we want to use Windows Meterpreter reverse underscore TCP. You guys can go ahead and copy that down. Everybody good with that? Okay. And then we want to say show options again, see if it's added in any more options. Like I said, it needs to know localhost to know where to connect back to. So we see that added in here with required is yes and nothing. So we want to set that to our local IP. So what do we say? Come on, Richard. I see you know it. We need to set lhost. How do we set lhost? Yep. And we spell it correctly. So we would set that to our local, let's see. I don't know my IP address. But what do? I'll just ask, because I can still use my shell normally. See, it doesn't exec. So now I can find my IP address if I've forgotten. That's typically what I use it for. And also in our next class we'll show like using nmap from in here as well and putting it in the database, which is why Grex needs to get his database fixed. So we want to set lhost to 172.16.0.170. And then you see some of the options are already filled in. Like I said, the R port for this case is always going to be the same. That's where Windows System SMB listens. And then our L port is already set to 4444. That's just the default. If I'm running multiple exploits at once, it could confuse itself and not be able to bind to a port that's already open, and then you could change that. You can change something that's already set the same way. I would just say set L port to 4343 or something. And that should be everything we need. Let's just show options again and make sure everything is set properly. Everything that says it's required is now set. We'll just check and make sure everything is okay. And then how do we make it run? Exploit. So now to say exploit. I'm not going to give it another, well, yeah, I guess I am. So, well, no, I'm not, because you guys can work with Meterpreter yourselves, because you can say help. So go ahead and do that, everyone.